Welcome to everybody. I am extremely happy to open this session, and I'm grateful and happy to have Commissioner Vestager with us today. You are undoubtedly a champion for competition, and especially competition in the digital economy. So we are honored to have you here, and I'm turning this over to my colleagues, to Rupert Hudson and to Peter Pitt.
Thank you, Michelle, and hi to everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces and to read familiar names. I have the pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, but I fear that there's not much to introduce to a community that is following your work on a day-to-day basis, because we are all sort of looking at that. Usually, the Academic Society for Competition, or ASCOLA, only gives its floor during the 3-day annual conferences to academics, to scholars who research and teach in competition law. But we do this one exception today because there's probably no one in the world who has stimulated the academic debate on antitrust like you. Maybe Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg are sort of competing on that level, but maybe on a sort of different level. So obviously I'm addressing now Margrethe Vestager, the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, who is in charge of the competition portfolio and also of the digital strategy of the Commission. So someone who's fitting into the topics we are discussing these days like no one else. You've been commissioner before in the Juncker Commission as well, and of course you have established a certain reputation with the Google cases and also with the state aid cases like the Apple one that even earned you a tweet from the White House that some of us at least see as a special recognition these days. Apart from that, you are a trained economist and you have been a Minister of Economics in Denmark before joining the Commission. So you're coming from that side to competition policy. I've thought of the more trivial things that maybe some of us do not yet know, but even that may be difficult to come up with. I guess that maybe some people don't know that you love to knit elephants during conferences. I don't know whether you're doing it right now, but this is something we've learned before. Okay, you better concentrate because these academics are not.
Yes, exactly.
They are sometimes critical of what you're doing, believe it or not. The second trivial thing is that you're said to be the model for a Danish TV series called Borgen, which is an international success and describes in very gripping and thrilling terms the rise of power of a female politician. I don't know whether you sort of want to comment on that going on to Netflix now with the next season, Netflix being one of the Silicon Valley companies as well. And you are the daughter of Lutheran ministers, and that may be a reason why you love spreading the gospel of whatever, free competition or so. You've got the floor, Margrethe Vestager. We're very happy that you're with us. And please accept our clapping virtual hands now.
Well, thank you very much. Obviously, this introduction is way too generous, because the thing is that keeping the markets competitive for fair competition to be the rule of the game really is a team effort, and this is also why I'm so happy to be with you today, because without the discussion that you're having, without the input. Of course, competition law and competition law enforcement would not be the same. So I'm very happy to be with you and very honored, and also very happy that you made this happen. Because had this been an ordinary year, we would be meeting in the beautiful city of Porto. In the coffee breaks, we could have a stroll by the Douro. But here we are, and since it cannot be any different, I think it's a good thing that we can meet in this way. And that is, of course, possible because of digitization. In the last month, when we have been fighting the virus by avoiding physical interaction, of course, digital technology has stepped in to fill the gap. We have been working remotely, learning, shopping, exercising, socializing. Technology has helped out. And that, of course, is really great. We have been able to visit museums in virtual ways. We've seen a lot of movies and a lot of series And you are indeed right that I'm set to be part of the inspiration for the Borgen series. But spoiler alert, I'm still married, even after 3 months of living apart during confinement. So just if you want to see it, which I can recommend, you see that it's definitely not all me, but it's quite a nice portrait of politics as it can be when it's neither the West Wing nor House of Cards. But the thing is that seeing how much digital technology influences our life, it's very, very important that it works for everyone. It should work well for us. It should be so that technology serves us as consumers in the market, as citizens in our democracies. And this is because that it creates opportunities, and these should be definitely for everyone, not limited to the few who can master the technology, who can afford the technology. It should be so that also when you go digital, a business is there and successful because you listen to the needs of your customers. You serve them well with prices, with the products, with the innovation that you can present. So it remains a top priority for the Commission to help shape a digital world that works for us as Europeans. That was true before coronavirus, and it is as true now. And we're even building that into the European Recovery Plan, Next Generation EU, because making the best use of digital tools will also help us to change our societies to make sure that we can fight climate change, but also that societies is a real home for all people. And we have a huge amount of work ahead of us to do just that. The white paper on artificial intelligence has set out our proposal as to how to build an AI ecosystem of trust. We're working with European governments to improve cybersecurity for vital infrastructure like the 5G networks. We are putting together a new digital education action plan to make sure that all Europeans have access to the equipment and the skills they need to make the most out of remote learning. And a few weeks ago, we began consulting on a Digital Services Act to keep consumers in Europe safe from dangerous products and illegal content online. But I think to focus on some of the fundamentals as well, we need to make sure that competition works well, also in a digital world. You know better than anyone why this is so important, how competition gives us the benefit of choice, keep prices down, also when things are paid for in terms of data, how it drives innovation, and help, of course, to deliver on the promises of technology that tomorrow will be better than today. The thing is that digitization is making it harder to make or to keep competition working the way that it should. I like to think of competition in traditional markets like being a coiled spring, like one of those sort of silky toys that the children love to play with. And companies may pull that out of shape for a while by forming cartels, by misusing their power. But when they let go, the spring is back in shape. And our job in these markets as competition enforcers is, of course, to make sure that companies let go of that spring so it's back in shape, and hopefully also work as a deterrent so that they don't even get the idea to manipulate how the spring is working. The thing is that in today's digital market, that doesn't always work. There can be a constant risk that by abusing their power, big companies will push a market to the tipping point where competition is gone forever. that the spring will be stretched so far that it no longer springs back, that it has lost, all the agility or what is needed, and that just ordering companies to stop their harmful behavior, that is no longer enough to bring competition back in those markets. And at the same time, in the last decade or so, we have seen many industries, in especially the ones that are most affected by digitization, becoming more and more concentrated, so that oh, I lost you. No, maybe I didn't. Anyway, we've seen that a new level of concentration, fewer companies controlling more of the market. And we have seen how digital platforms indeed have gained a central position here, like a spider in the World Wide Web. They see everything that is going on, and they collect vital data that others cannot get. So the spring can be broken before we even start. Competition may not work, not because of a company's action, but simply because of the structure of that market. In the last few years, competition experts, enforcers around the world, academics, have been thinking about how to tackle these problems. And in the Commission, we have learned a lot from the report that 3 special advisors delivered to us last year, as well as what others have been doing, because this is really a communal effort. This is for the community to figure out what to do and how to inspire to actions being taken. What is absolutely clear is that there is no such thing as one simple solution. We need a mix of approaches. It's a complex problem, and it needs also a relatively complex solution. You need more new tools in your toolbox in order to deal with that. And that includes new regulations, but also new competition powers. But it also, of course, means making full use of the powers that we have already. What we have seen is incredible when it comes to speed. Digital markets, they can tip very fast. So we as competition enforcers need to be able to move quickly. Only there are some corners that we cannot cut. We can't take a decision until we have done a thorough investigation. We have to look very carefully at all the evidence. And in our union of law, obviously, companies have the full right to defend themselves. And that's the right thing to do. That being said, of course, it makes it hard to reach a conclusion before it sometimes is too late. One answer to that problem is to make more use of interim measures to keep things from getting worse before we have gone through all the evidence. Last year, for the first time in nearly 18 years, we used that power to temporarily stop Broadcom enforcing the terms in its contracts with customers, which banned them from buying chips from anyone else. And in this digital age, I don't expect that it will be another 2 decades before we do this again, rather on the contrary. Even with interim measures, we may not always be able to step in before a market can tip. But that doesn't mean that we have to accept a monopoly as a fait accompli. It has been clear now for many decades that we have the power to impose what you may call restorative remedies, ordering companies to take positive action to undo the damage that they have done to competition. In their report, the special advisors urged us to make use of these remedies, and we will do just that whenever we find that this is the right thing to do in order for competition to come back. But there is only so much that existing powers can do. We also need new ways of tackling problems that digitization causes. And one part of that could be new regulatory rules. At the start of this month, we launched a consultation to get views on what we call, sort of in Commission language, inception impact assessment. I know it sounds as something out of a James Bond movie, and it is exciting. And this is something we do in order to get sort of a first idea. What would people outside of the Commission, what would stakeholders think about this? Because though we talk about inception, there's nothing to do with sort of planting dreams in people's heads, or perhaps it is if fairer digital market is indeed what you're dreaming of, but it is actually a sort of a roadmap which sets out sort of the main options for how the rules could work. And one of those options would be a clear list of do's and don'ts for the platforms that act as gatekeepers in our digital world. That could, as one example, include rules to stop platforms misusing their position as both player and referee, both owning a platform and at the same time competing with others that rely on that same platform. One possible rule on the list of do's and don'ts could be a rule against platform displaying their own services more prominently than how they what they do for their rivals. We have also seen that gatekeeper platforms can make it difficult for others to compete by keeping control of data that rivals would need in order to serve customers, even when those customers are happy for their data to be shared. So another rule could involve the duty for these platforms to share real-time customer data with other businesses when those customers request it. In all of this, for me, it's very important to focus on the things that matters the most. Not every platform is one of those huge gatekeepers with the powers to make or break the businesses that rely on it. And the kind of behavior that is harmful when done by a big gatekeeper can be entirely innocent when it's done by a less powerful platform. So it would make sense to focus the rules on the actions of the gatekeepers that pose the most serious threats to fairer digital markets. Those regulations, they would not replace the competition rules. Instead, the two would work together. And there's nothing new about that. As competition enforcers, I think we are all deeply involved in keeping competition working in dozens of regulated markets, from railroads and aviation to energy and banking. But for that partnership to work between regulation and competition law enforcement, competition enforcers, of course, need to have the powers to hold up our end of the deal. And in a digital age where the very structure of the market can create problems for competition, this means that we need the power to investigate more than individual cases. We also need to be able to tackle sort of structural problems, which our existing tools will not allow us to do. And we need more effective way to tackle concerns that affects many markets at once, rather than using a series of individual cases to fight what is really a systematic problem. So there is a gap here, but it is a gap that we can fill And several of the world's competition authorities, they already show the way. In both Greece and Iceland, in Romania and the UK, in Mexico and South Africa, the competition authorities can carry out market investigations and impose a remedy to fix any competition problem that they find. And there's growing support, including, for instance, from the European Consumers Organization, BUC, for the European Commission to be able to do this. So earlier this month, we launched a consultation on a new competition tool. And this new tool would let us deal with structural problems with competition when we cannot do this with the powers that we have already, or when existing powers would be much less effective. It would let us investigate markets in the same rigorous way that we would look into individual cases with the same exacting standards of proof, with the right for companies to be involved to defend themselves, and the need for the decision that we would take to stand up in court. And if we did find a problem, we could intervene, not by fining companies or finding them guilty of breaking the rules, but by imposing obligations that would protect competition. That could involve duties to behave in a certain way, to make data available to others, as one example. As a last resort, it could even mean breaking up companies to protect competition. This tool would not replace the powers that we have already. We would still primarily investigate cartels, agreements that would harm competition, abuses of power under the existing rules. But the new tool would also allow us to act when those rules aren't enough to keep markets competitive. For instance, it would mean that we could deal with concentrated markets where companies keep their prices in line, not by agreeing to form a cartel, but just by taking care not to undercut one another. That tacit collusion can be especially easy in a transparent digital world like ours, where companies can constantly watch each other's prices and change their own very quickly in response. When there's no agreement, there's no illegality under the rules as we have them now, even though it means that consumers end up paying more than they should. With this new tool, we would be able to tackle this problem. We could also deal better with markets that are prone to tip. We could move a lot faster to prevent this from happening by stepping in as soon as a company starts to misuse its power to drive out competition. And even if it's not yet big enough to have broken competition rules as they stand. And even with just one investigation, we could deal with a situation where a gatekeeper platform is using its power to drive out competition in a whole series of markets at the same time. Many of the biggest issues that this tool could help us resolve, they are linked to digital markets. But I doubt that it would make sense to apply it only to these markets instead of covering the whole economy, as our existing competition powers do, also because we of course see that the entire economy is digitizing. So it would be kind of tricky to say, well, only this but not that, knowing that more and more will have a digital dimension. And it is partly the sort of issues I have discussed that we would come up with in other markets as well. In fact, the Greek, the Icelandic, and the British competition authorities, they have so far used this type of power in markets that aren't digital. And as said, it is also because we see that digitization is affecting pretty much every industry. So how to distinguish, how to draw a line to say, well, this is digital and this is not. With these three elements, with a firm competition law enforcement of existing competition rules, new clear-cut, well-defined regulation, and also a new competition tool, we can make sure that digital markets work for everyone. The challenge, of course, is now to put these ideas into practice, and for that we need your help. The help of competition experts and consumer groups, businesses, national authorities, to help us design the rules so they will work in the best possible way. Our two inception impact assessments, one on new regulations and on the new competition tools, they are still open until the end of June. Our broader public consultation on new competition tool is open until 8th of September. And if those consultations and the other evidence that we are gathering confirm that we need new competition powers, we plan to put forward a proposal for a new law to make that competition tool a reality by the end of this year. There's a lot at stake here. If our society can adapt to the challenges that digitization brings, well, then we can look forward to wider choice, new services, new devices, lower prices, new possibilities, all summing up in hopefully better lives, and in still making sure that the market serves the consumer. But if we fail to adapt, then the risk is, of course, that the dark side of technology gets the upper hand. And then we will, of course, have no one to blame but ourselves. So the changes that I have mentioned today, they are a choice to take charge and to build our digital future. And of course, I do hope and invite you all to join me in this in order to get it right, because only when a team is working together, we will be truly successful. So thank you very much.
Peter, you do the start.
Yeah, thank you very much, Commissioner Vestager. This was really a most interesting and forward-looking speech, and you not only gave us the general framework, but also indicated measures so concrete and so far-reaching that I saw many of us taking notes while you speak, and taking down what the EU Commission, or noting down what the EU Commission is about to change in the framework of European competition law, apparently. So on this part of your speech alone, I myself would have dozens of questions, but I refrain from posing any of those and give the word to the participants. And we have, while you spoke, collected already an incredible number of fascinating and sometimes long questions. So I'd say we start right away with the questions. And may I ask all of you to unmute yourselves once we call your name, and then you state your question as briefly as possible, as concisely as possible, because we have really more questions than we have time. And so with that remark, I'd say we fire away. I think the first question I have on the list is Christophe Carugati. So please, Christophe, the floor is yours. And in case your question is no longer up to date, you don't want to pose it any longer, just a very, very quick remark would be helpful.
Thank you all for this conference. I am a PhD researcher in law and economics at Paris 2 University on big data and competition law. And I agree we need a regulation and competition enforcement. But my question is about regulation and the scope of the regulation. We know that regulation can be symmetric to all participants and asymmetric, only to few firms, again, objective criteria. The Commission is considering the latter, and my question is very simple. We see that most of the problems are structural competition problems due to network effects, high economy of scope and scale, data, and not much monopoly problems. I mean, Facebook, Google became dominant. They were not dominant, and they are dominant due to the structure of the market. So is it the rough path to do an asymmetric regulation, since we must address different structural competition problems and not monopoly problems? Furthermore, we see a level of concentration in the end of few firms, but also high level of competition between large and small firms. Look at the competition between Facebook Shop and Amazon. So there is a level of concentration in their core market, but also competition in adjacent markets. So is it very good to do asymmetric regulation?
As always, when something is labeled as a simple question, I know will be very, very tricky.
Yeah, no.
No, but because it is indeed tricky. But the thing is that I don't think that it's a given that because of the way that digitization works with network effects and marginal cost approaching zero, that we'll just have to imagine that basically every market will be a market with one dominant player. Because we can see that in some markets before illegal behavior, we had several players. Before the illegal Google behavior in shopping comparison, they promoting themselves, demoting others. There was a vibrant community, a vibrant marketplace of shopping comparison services. We saw, at least initially, effects of the first Amazon decision on ebooks, the one that started with German and English language ebooks, where we took commitments that allowed for more ebook suppliers to gain market shares. I think it is important to do two things at the same time. First, where we have gatekeepers to a marketplace, to address that specifically, because sometimes I fear that the call for regulation is also a call that sort of is based on the assumption that we will be so heavy-handed that basically the small ones will suffer from the regulation and the big ones, they will thrive because they have the resources to live with the regulation. And this is why I find it's important to say, well, if you are a gatekeeper, it can be objectively defined what it is that you do, which is also why we can say what is then the responsibility that you have. Because we have seen that in so many other markets over time, that what the small one is doing, it has no real effect. But if the big one is doing just a bit of it, it will have a lot of effect in that marketplace. And the second thing is, of course, that if we can prevent gatekeepers from arising, then we will not have the same issues, because then you still have a competitive marketplace. Of course, this is coming from the fact that it is not just nature that we see at stake here, or nature, the characteristics of digitization, but also that competition is very fierce for the market to become this gatekeeper who owns this marketplace. And sometimes, of course, unfortunately, that competition happens with illegal behavior.
Maybe we stick with the digital topic. There are many questions on other topics as well, but I would love to hear Cathy Cherez and Alexandre Destrel together, maybe, because their questions seem to be aligned. Kati, can you give a start?
Yes, thank you very much. Dear Commissioner, thank you very much for this inspiring talk. And I refer to this speech that you have given and to many, I think, other speeches you have given in the past. And my question relates to this intersection between competition law and consumer protection or consumer law. And we see in national settings many authorities moving institutionally to a merged approach. And of course, I'm familiar with the institutional setting of the Commission and within the Commission, so we will not do that tomorrow. But how do you see maybe personally and as a commissioner a way forward to a more merged approach where consumer interest and protection perhaps, and especially in digitalization, is taken more on board in the work that you do?
Maybe Alexandre, you jump in.
Yes, good morning and thank you very much for the speech, but also for making our time very interesting. With all your proposal, you really stimulate us to think a lot. I have a simple question, as you like them, and that is for the regarding the enforcement and the institutional design. So those don't rules, who do you envisage could enforce them? Would it be the Commission? Would it be a new EU regulatory authority, or you would left that to the national authorities of the member states? Thank you very much.
But it's very interesting because you see, I see with a lot of the national authorities who hold a double mandate that they can really make the most of that. As you say, you know, and I think everyone knows we are organized in a different way, which means, of course, that we coordinate, but we also try to make sure that we see competition problems when it's competition problems and problems of unfair trading practices or consumer law not being upheld when that is what is at stake. And things are crazy complicated in the first place. The competition cases in themselves are very complicated cases. And I think it serves as well that we can keep things just somewhat apart. But of course, there are very, very, very close interrelationships because it's all about how to make sure that the market serves the consumer. And when you see some theories of harm that sort of form a complex where it can be both sort of very traditional issues of prices, but also limitations to innovation, you'd see that of course things are moving closer together. And if you think about the list of do's and don'ts, you see that has very much to do with consumer protection. That you as a consumer are presented with different choices, that the platform that hosts these different services do not promote themselves. That is in order to serve consumers in the best possible way. We have not decided yet how to organize the enforcement work. In my many years in politics, one of the things that I have seen very often, and probably also myself being guilty of it, is that you can always suggest a new authority. That now you're doing something, you're very active, you suggest that someone will do something, and I think here it's very important that we get the substance right. How should these tools work? And then hopefully that we can ask existing authorities for a new competition tool. Obviously, DG Comp would be very well placed to do that. And maybe also some of the other things, but that is for the future. Because also here, it's very important to be conscious of resource constraints. We don't have all the resources in the world. We are constrained already. And I think it is important that we make absolute best use of the very high skilled people that we have, the organizational structures that we have, and a culture for the rule of law. because that is really embedded in the institutions that we have already. And that is one of the things that we should really never, ever lose. And it takes time to build that culture in a new authority for obvious and good reasons. But we just don't have that kind of time on our hands because this is a matter of urgency. And that is even more clear to me now after the corona crisis than what it was before.
Hey, thank you very much. I would now like to give the word to Maurice Vestager, who has a question on the interaction between data and data protection and competition law. Maurice?
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate this and also your invitation for our input. We often hear how competition and privacy can be complementary, that companies can compete on privacy as a dimension of quality. And perhaps maybe, you know, the Microsoft LinkedIn is a good example of that. But there's often, what I see with the competition officials is they're arguing then that in order to increase competition, we need to increase data mobility. And one way to do it is allowing users to have data portability, interoperability, but then also requiring the sharing of data. And my question to you would be, what happens when privacy and competition conflict? And you're starting to see some of the powerful platforms arguing not sharing the data on the basis of privacy. That might be pretextual, but it might also be genuine. And then the broader question then is, for a competition official, what if competition itself is not good? What if competition itself is actually toxic, that there's a competition for surveillance, to track individuals, and what the data sharing might actually allow is the toxic forms of competition rather than the beneficial forms of competition?
Well, this is something that is, of course, top of mind. Unfortunately, we do not yet see a lot of privacy as being part of your offer. I still think that the market response when it comes to ensuring privacy is way too limited. Recently, I just heard about someone, I think they're called IDside, that would offer programs that would allow you to register your preferences once and for all. And then the software would make sure that your settings always reflect your preferences. And that is indeed what is needed. But so far, the market response and this idea that privacy is invigorating competition and giving new parameters for businesses to compete upon, I think the response in that respect so far has been disappointingly weak. But the second thing is, I very much agree that there is a risk of a sort of toxic competition. But the thing is that this is not new. I think we unfortunately still see it in parts of the world where the ILO conventions on workers' rights and working conditions are not fully implemented. That here there is a competition about we don't care how we treat our workers because basically we compete with the health of our workers as what we put at stake here. And I think you can find numerous other examples. It could be that you benefit from not having sufficiently strong rules on how to protect biodiversity or drinking water. And over decades and decades and decades where we have built up societies, we have agreed that there are things that where we would not allow for competition because it will indeed be toxic, sometimes also literally so. And I think that is completely justified when our legislator says, well, these are the frames. These are the rights. Consumers have rights when it comes to the products that they buy. Citizens have rights when it comes to privacy. and within that framework, go compete. I think that is 100% legitimate, and I think it's very important that we have it this way, because otherwise I think citizens would lose trust in us as competition law enforcers, that we respect the democracy and the laws of our democracy. At the same time, I do hope that the legislators see the benefits of competition, so that that there is still sort of an agile zone between what competition can do in itself and what privacy can do, because I do think and do hope that we will see a development where competition is prone to promote privacy in some of the instances where it is indeed still needed.
Thank you. We do another double take, and I ask you please to keep your questions short and the answers maybe as well. Thank you so much. And I asked Salil Mera and Fabiana Di Porto. I think your questions fit together nicely. Salil, are you there?
Yes.
Great.
So good morning, and thank you very much for taking the time to do this talk. My question is about the gatekeeper problem you mentioned and the potential remedy for it. But we see this gatekeeper problem you refer to in a number of areas. You know, the control of smartphone app stores, the role of Amazon, for example, in governing its third-party sellers. However, addressing this problem, this gatekeeper problem, would seem to require a competition enforcer to either police the conduct of firms by either setting forth some fairly detailed rules about the gatekeeper's conduct, or else becoming engaged in the gatekeeper's decisions in an almost real-time way. And I'm wondering if the former course, the sort of rule-based course is taken, how will these rules be made to shift, evolve, change as business and technology change? And if it's the latter, sort of the real-time, can an agency be confident in imposing a remedy in an ad hoc fashion that can't be set forth specifically in advance? And I thank you for taking your time to address this.
And Fabiana, maybe you just unmute yourself, please, before you speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner, for your great speech. And my comment is actually very much in line with what Salil said, because among the regulatory obligations that the Commission is considering introducing, there is once more disclosure regulation, which is of course very welcome, but eventually it could be considered to introduce a sort of enhanced disclosure regulation, a sort of algorithmic disclosure regulation, in a sense, some sort of regulation that takes into account algorithms and that is data driven, in a sense that it would be more co-evolutionary. It takes into account the way digital platforms and in general the firms of the future do behave in those contexts, and that would be more those disclosures will also evolve and change in as much as the strategies on the market would also change. Thank you.
I'm very happy that I have to unmute myself, so I have a second to think. This is a very interesting idea. Obviously, we live in a world where we presume that citizens and businesses will follow the laws of the country and of the market where they do business. And I think also that we are allowed to make that presumption because most people and most businesses, they play by the book. But it is indeed an interesting question. How can businesses then show that this is what they do? Because, you know, very often when people say, oh, why don't you take more sort of behavioral remedies in cases, why do you have this preference for structural remedies, for instance, in merger cases? And then I say, well, you really don't want the Commission sitting on your shoulder for years and years to come to watch every move you take if it's a behavioral remedy. If it's a structural remedy, it's done and dealt with. You will have a trustee, but eventually the structure will have changed, and you don't need the monitoring. You really don't need the commission sitting on your shoulder. And here I can tell you that that one of the reasons why our cases take quite some time is because there's very little transparency in the businesses that we deal with. So this idea of some sort of algorithmic transparency or data-driven transparency, I find that very interesting, because if a business model is truly digital and you consume and use humongous amounts of data, then of course it's not for a person or a team of people to be able to look into that. So that is definitely noted here as part of how can businesses then show that they are compliant with the do's and the don'ts.
Okay, so if I may, I will forward you something.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, you won't leave this talk without sort of getting more work from us, Commissioner. That's a good thing. Unfortunately, we are already exceeding or running out of time, and I'm pretty sure that on this, say, Friday afternoon in Brussels time, you have other stuff to do, like having some ice cream on the streets or so. I don't know exactly what's on your agenda today, or some new tools. Maybe you just, for a final question, do you just want to disclose what you plan with Google Fitbit, and will you prohibit that one now? Or will you give a short answer on that one?
Oh, I appreciate that you ask. I think you have to. I also appreciate or hope that you will respect that that since this is now notified and an open investigation, of course I will not comment on that.
Unfortunately, I learned from our talks yesterday in ASCOLA that there's a lot to read on that already from our community as well. You will get something on that. Commissioner, we are so thankful for these very interesting answers and your very interesting talk. I say sorry to all those of you who have put forward so very, very interesting questions that for lack of time, we cannot sort of put forward now, but putting it into the chat means that we are taking care of that, sort of, or taking note of your ideas, and that's a good thing. Questions on state aid and independence of competition authorities and goals beyond promoting competition, etc., etc., etc. I could go on, but I can't, because we want to let you do your work, Commissioner, which is so inspiring for us. Thank you so much for being with us, and have a good day and a successful time.
Well, thank you, and I don't say it for nothing. It's really appreciated if you give your input in our different consultations, because these are firsts. It has not been done before. For instance, the gatekeeper thing, and also for the new competition tools. As said, we have taken inspiration from other jurisdictions. But this is for the entirety of the European Union. So please don't hesitate. Please give us your feedback and your ideas. It's really appreciated. So thank you very much for taking your time today and being patient with me and my rather long answers.
Thank you. Simonetta suggested we clap our hands and unmute ourselves for that. Let's try that. And, so we at least come under the. Thank you so much. All ASCOLA people. All ASCOLA people, we move to our next sessions at 12:30, so we give you a very short break, and then you log into the next session with 3 panels of incredible quality, obviously, and see you there. Bye.